and I'll hand over to Brian to do his bit. It's not where I wanted to be.
I can't if you find his file.
Sorry.
Next. Right, good. Hopefully everyone can see that. I shall now move myself out of view, but in position to move the slide on.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll just stand if that's okay with you. I'll not stand in front of that. Good evening, gentlemen. Nice to meet you all. Let me say first, before I introduce myself, I've just looked at the age range here, and I'm going to slightly modify my talk, only very slightly, simply because some people in the PWI wanted me to talk more to the younger members about what it was like in BR, and I suspect most of you know what it was like. So I'll amend it a little bit, and please don't think I'm patronising you if I say something you think, well, I bloody knew that. Okay. So I'm Brian Maddison. I was a railwayman for well over 50 years, and I went to my first PWI meeting in 1964 at Peterborough, when most of the members there were either gangers or P-way supervisors, I have to say, with just a sprinkling of office staff to move in with them. Over the years, I was a member and then a fellow, and for a while I was chairman of the Peterborough section.
Sorry. Rodney, your alarm is going on. You switch your alarm. It's all right. Sorry.
It's okay.
You can hear it, I can't.
So the first picture is just there because that's me in there in sometime in the 70s, complete with flares, and I think probably newly issued high vis. I don't think we had them very long before that photo was taken. I was born and raised in Fletton. Do something, please. Fletton is immediately south of Peterborough. It was at the time full of brickyards, and it was a most amazing playground. The East Coast Main Line went straight through the middle. I lived over that way somewhere, and we came over here and we fished and we played and we absolutely loved it. I think parents chucked us out the house at the age of 5 and said, don't come back till tea. But it was a great playground, even if it was by today's standards somewhat dangerous. Anyway, while I was there, of course, I wandered over to the railway and I watched the trains go by. And one Sunday morning I went to watch them, and instead of trains, there was one of these things working. Not one exactly like that, because that's much newer than the one I must have seen at the time. But I looked at that and I thought, that's amazing. It's digging out the whole thing that it's standing on, and it's not falling over. And I reckon that was what gave me a bit of a seed of that I might like to work on the railways as an engineer of some sort. After that, I went to grammar school, didn't do particularly well, got a couple of rubbish jobs, got sacked from one of them, or asked to leave because the guy was a friend of my parents and didn't want me to have sacking. Anyway, but at 17, I got the chance to join the railway. I was interviewed for a job as a junior technical officer at Peterborough by the district engineer, who was called Ted Labram. Ted was ex-Royal Engineers, and it helped me with the interview that I was in the Army Cadets, I think. Anyway, I got the job, and it changed my life. It really did. From a pretty useless student and a pretty useless worker doing dog spotting, all of a sudden, within days, I was given responsibility. I was told, go out to that bloody bridge and do this and do that, and it's your job, sort it out. Within 6 weeks, I was sent to a meeting at Boston Docks where they said, look, they want to talk about the weighbridge. Go and do what you can and bring back the information. What they didn't tell me was Boston Docks had a long-running feud with British Railways because Boston Docks was municipally owned, And their rival port, King's Lynn, on the Wash, was part of the British Transport Commission system, you see. So they reckoned that BR or British Railways as it was then, were actually favouring them over Boston, and they accused us of not giving them any wagons to load, charging demurrage where we shouldn't, stealing the teacups, raping the women, I don't know what. Anyway, I got through that. The very kindly port engineer guided the port manager away from those subjects, recognised the fact that I was struggling a little bit as still a 17-year-old, and I took the information back, took it to my boss. I felt so proud. I really enjoyed myself. Anyway, junior technical officer at Peterborough, I got drafted in on the work side, which was where I remained for most of my working life. But after about 18 months, the railways being a contracted industry at the time, the Peterborough office shut and I was sent to King's Cross. And what could have been better? They were paying me to go down to London every day. I could stop 2 or 3 nights a week and sample all sorts of delights before I came home. So that was a good time for me. And while I was down there, I got some quite senior jobs to do, simply because they were short of other stuff to do them. After that, I looked for a promotion and maybe somewhere where I could have the excuse to leave home. So I went to Leicester. Leicester was another little office, a sub-office from Nottingham. And while I was there, several important things happened to me. I met a girl, I got married, I became a Leicester City fan, and I was invited to join the Railways diving team because a couple of the lads working there were railway divers. And I took a bit of convincing at first that there actually was a railway diving team. I mean, you know, as a matter of fact, I'm doing a talk to our local probus, and they have advertised it as Railwayman engineer driver, because they didn't believe it. They thought it was a misprint. Anyway, so that was Leicester. Stayed there a little while. Same thing repeated itself. The Leicester office was closed and I was moved to Nottingham Furlong House for the Nottingham division, which is where I stayed for the next 18 years. The majority of that time first on the building section and then the bridge section, and then towards the end of my time there in my first management role, looking after the outside artisan staff. The job that at one time would have been called Chief Works Inspector, but had been downgraded to Works Production Assistant by that time. As I say, I stayed then for 18 years. Eventually, mid-80s, I moved back to Peterborough. Peterborough was a newly developed engineering area on the East Coast Main Line, a sort of precursor to sectorisation, because it just really looked after the East Coast Main Line from King's Cross through to Yorkshire and round from Doncaster nearly into Leeds. So it was a great section to work on. And that's where I stayed until privatisation came along. Once privatisation came along, I elected not to go where they wanted to send me. And 3 of us divers set up our own company, which was called Bridgeway. And we did okay, actually. It's still going now. I'm long since retired from it, but it's still thriving. It employs several hundred people, I believe, and it's still in the rail industry. And just this year, it's been awarded the King's Enterprise Award, and I was proud to go and attend the meeting for that. Anyway, so that's sort of my background. And why a book? Next slide, please. Well, to introduce you to the book, I'm going to introduce you to this guy here. His name's Brian Garner. He was a good friend. He was already in the diving team. He was in the diving team when it started. He was one of the ones I originally met there. He's been a friend and a mentor to me. He's now 92, and I saw him just last week in the home where he's living. But he was an out-and-out bloody rogue. He really was. His favourite story was to tell you about his time in the desert when he was doing his national service, and he and somebody called Captain Jebb were put in charge of the mess accounts. And apparently, by all accounts, Captain Jebb came into him one day and said, "Garner, somebody's told the truth. Now we're all in the shit." Anyway, he narrowly avoided 2 years in the military jail at Colchester by claiming he'd never passed his 3rd class education. whatever that was, and he got off with it because he shouldn't have been allowed to touch money, apparently. Anyway, I've put him in it, next now please, because very soon on he said to me, Brian, memories are better than dreams. Now, I can't remember the exact context about that, but I suspect he was trying to get me to do something that I probably shouldn't have done. But what he said stuck with me there. And so many years later, when I've retired and I've gradually reduced my workload to virtually nothing, and I thought of something to do, I got thinking about what he said, and I got thinking about the fact that I had worked for well over 50 years in the rail industry, and I could only think of 2 short periods, each of less than 6 months, when I didn't thoroughly enjoy myself. I really did. And I suspect a lot of people, engineers on VR, can probably say the same thing. So I thought it might be an idea. Maybe those memories are good enough to put in a book. So that's the book. Took me a couple of winters to write it, and I've just simply written by life as I remember it. Now, it's not a definitive history of my life, because many people have pointed out to me, well, you didn't quite remember that right, Brian. One lad on a job, I was saying how well he did. He said, well, we didn't do too bad, but I did have to work a 26-hour shift to get it through, and things like that. So but it's as I remember it. It includes incidents, some amusing, some just interesting, some descriptions of how we did things in those days. Things of what I like to talk about as the railway family, because I can remember, as most of you will, that if you had a particular job to do, you could always find somebody in the rail industry that knew how to do it, that would help you do it, that could do it for you. If you needed a particular something made, somebody would know how to do it for you. And so it goes that, looking back, I suppose, into the time of a fully integrated railway. So that's the background of me. That's the background of why I wrote the book. I've just now selected a few bits and pieces from the book to talk about. And then these are not in any sort of chronological, yes please, order, but just as they came to mind that I thought might be interested. So I'll pop this one in first. And bear in mind, I've never worked in a Chief Civil Engineer's design office. I've always been down at divisional level and you know, in our smaller drawing offices, doing smaller jobs and not being entrusted with major design work. So we were always rather looking out for something to do. And this is a little footbridge in the Nottingham area. It's called Bobber's Mill Footbridge, and I was in the the bridge section. There was only 3, maybe 4 of us in the section. And unfortunately, one day, some elderly gentleman walked up these steps and the timber tread collapsed under him and he hurt himself. So the bridge was closed, and I was passed on the job to get it sorted out. I thought, well, if I don't tell anybody too much, we can do a nice job of this without letting head office, Chief Civil Engineers, know what we're up to. And even not initially letting my boss know what we were up to. Anyway, so I got the drawing board out and I drew new staircases, designed new staircases. The old girders just needed a bit of repair, but it was deemed obvious that we wouldn't be politically good to put a timber deck back, have somebody having fallen through it. So we wanted to fit a steel deck to it. So I sat down and over a couple of weeks did that. I had to pay a couple of visits to the local polytechnic library to look at certain standards that we didn't even keep in our office. And anyway, it got done. It got designed, and then I had to think, well, how the hell do we get it made? Obviously, I was thinking about it as it went on. We had no facilities to let a contract for something like that. Contracts were few and far being let from a divisional office. But fortuitously, Derby Loco was short of work at the time. They were being run down effectively in favour of moving all the stuff over to the Lit Church Lane side. So I went to see him and they grabbed the chance and they built the staircases for us. They took the girders away and repaired them. And it all came to site, beautifully made and in pristine condition. So that was good. That was part of the railway family working together, I felt. And it was easy for me because all I had to do was write them a letter and say, please do it. And, you know, through some sort of internal procedure, the work got charged. I didn't really see too much about the cost. And we put it up ourselves. The brick piers were stayed. I was on top of this pier when we used a P Wade crane out of Lenton Yard to bring the bridge down. They had a 15-ton diesel crane. Unfortunately, the driver was inclined to have a drink, and also he was mainly used to shifting all kinds of track about in Lenton Yard. So he did come down a bit cavalier, and I had to jump out the way as he pulled the bridge in. Anyway, it went in. A good job, a job I like to talk about. The only thing was at the end, somebody spilt the bloody beans. And if you do read the book, there's a guy in it that I refer to as Spannerman. I didn't invent the name, other people call him that. He liked to put a spanner in the works. I could tell you his name, I won't, I could tell you his name now because the poor old sod's dead, but and he told somebody at Chief Civil Engineers, built a bridge, you know. He wasn't even in the build bridge section. Anyway, Chief Civil Engineers sent a lovely bloke out and he took me to site and he looked all over and he pronounced everything was okay, except we'd used site wells to attach a couple of keep strips for the bearings, which he didn't really approve of. Apart from that, it all went well. And just an illustration of a job that I enjoyed doing and the sort of job we did. Second thing I want to talk about, and I've been asked really to talk about by one or two other people in the PWI, because if you'll recall, there's an article in a previous PWI journal written by Bob Clark about line speed handbacks on the East Coast Main Line. It's an interesting talk. I'm not going to talk to you about the technical stuff on that because it's all in what he wrote in the journal. But basically, when it came to sectorisation, Intercity were intent on running trains from London to Edinburgh in 4 hours. Not just once to show it, but a regular timetable of several trains a day doing that trip in 4 hours, which they don't achieve now. And to do that, one way was to remove most, if not all, of the allowance for temporary speed restrictions on the route. And so the idea was, right, you do your relay and your ballast cleaning, anything like that, and you get it back to line speed before 6 o'clock on the Monday morning. And Bob has explained how that was done by good, accurate levelling of the ballast before tamping, consolidation of the ballast by various means, and you can move it on one if you like. I've just put that because that's an intercity train and one more if you like. The use of the dynamic track stabilizer, of which this is a foreign looking one, but that's the machine. And that, so there were the two things really, making sure that the tampers did only the minimum amount of lifting they needed to, and stabilising the track by the DTS. And that was done at the weekend. If we were on the 4-track section, we then opened up at 50 miles an hour on the Sunday afternoon and got another possession late Sunday night through to Monday morning to have another go at it with the DTS and whatever else was needed, and then open up at 140 miles an hour because some of the East Coast Main Line at the time was authorised for that speed. And I'm told by my colleagues that we did 105 of those in 1 year. And over a 4-year period, we didn't have a TSR on the Peterborough section. It wasn't without some trepidation that each of us, because I was one of the ones that went out, and it was this period was my only foray into P-Way work, really. My gaffer there had said, we're a small organisation, you've got to do your bit in P-Way. And he eventually gave me a speller's renewals assistant, which was right out of my comfort zone. But I was one of those who went out 4 o'clock most Monday morning to reopen the line at 140 or 120 or whatever it was. And that's quite daunting because it's still dark. You can't really see what's happened. Fortunately, the lads at Peterborough were brilliant. I just had to rely on the technical staff and the supervisors who were aligned with me to be honest about what they'd done, which they were. And we walked the line. I took my cross-level gauge and they gave me the information. the DTS produces some information, but really I relied mainly on what I was told and what I saw for myself. And we went this time and we reopened them up. And there were times when I went home thinking, you know, is some engine driver going to give me report a bump in the track or something? Nothing that I ever thought was dangerous, but maybe because none of us wanted to be the first person to actually not open at line speed in all this time. And I talked again to Ian Kitchen, who was one of the others doing it, and he said, oh, same thing when I was driving home. Did I do that right? And I only really had one time when I was concerned, and that was actually the S&C just off the relaying we'd been doing, which had it been in the relaying, I wouldn't have opened it. But the fact we hadn't changed anything and it was still running like that, I just gave the PWME a call and made him promise to send somebody out on the Monday morning and tackle the bits and bobs that I'd seen. So that was my short period on the P-Way. But the one thing it doesn't say in Bob Clark's article is the part that Band 3 radio played in us being able to do that. And it was like an in-house thing. I don't know if you remember it, but Band 3 was the radio system introduced for trains, train drivers, locos, on-track plan to contact signallers and control. But then it was developed by BRB radio engineers, so we had handsets so everybody on site could have one. They were great. You could ring home on it even. You know, there was a little place in King's Cross Exchange that a few of us who were on call had our home numbers put in, so I could dial a number. My wife never really did, because it was one-way communication. She never really got the hang of saying over to me. But anyway, what we did was with the help of BRB radio people, we hired mobile masts. So if we got a relaying site, we put a mast up. Everybody that was equipped with one of these Band 3 radios, which were in honour of the Western, I suppose, called Brunel's at this time when they were issued. Everybody who was issued with one, when they went to site, was given the frequency to change it to. And if a ballast train came on site, when he was met at the protection, the driver was asked to change to that frequency. All the on-track plant were on that frequency. All the signal staff were on that frequency. The overhead line, being the overhead line, refused to use it, and that caused a few problems. But if you think about it, we'd introduced more complexities into the relaying by the DTS and all this sort of thing. And so you've got a big site with a lot of trains and track. But once everybody was on this system, everybody knew what was happening. That, you know, you didn't have to be the one talking. You could listen to the conversations round. And if a supervisor wanted some information, somebody else would pipe, oh, I know where it is. It's just here, this sort of thing. And, you know, the calling in if you called in a ballast train, everybody heard this and they knew that there was a ballast train moving about. And it's a great shame that at the end of that, come privatisation, that system wasn't adopted into the privatised industry. Mainly, I think, because contractors didn't want to buy into an XBR system. They said, well, we've got mobile phones, that's fine. And that's fair enough, you know, but it's a shame. And of course, the idea of having high-speed handbacks lost its momentum because there was no longer a BR intercity pushing for this 4 hours, and you got separate TOCs and rail track, and so that got left. But it was a period of time that I really enjoyed. So, Card 7, back to the works organisation. I'm going to mention this because for 9 of the years that I was employed in the works organisation, 5 of them at Nottingham and 4 at Peterborough, I was the manager for the outside artisan staff, which, as many of you know, included bricklayers, carpenters, painters, steel workers. In my case at Nottingham, a tinsmith who worked in the shops, and when I was at Peterborough, we had a French polisher who worked at King's Cross. He didn't do any French polisher anymore, but that was his original job. looking after the, I suppose, the boardroom tables or something. And it was really good, I believe, because if you look at this job here, you've got heavy timber engineering supporting heavy work repairing a bridge. And we've had carpenters who've done this lifelong. We put apprentices with them to learn the trade. I had a carpenter at Leicester called Jock Oliver, who I've seen cutting tusk tenon joints with a bloody chainsaw out of massive timbers. So, you know, it was stuff they weren't necessarily learning at college. And the same, I say, the brickwork and the timber work was there. And anybody from the technical office could just say, well, we need to put centres up there and give it to other of the supervisors who knew could do it. You didn't have to design the centres for them. They knew what they were doing. Next one, please. And similarly, on the steelwork side, this was a bridge in Derby, London Road Bridge. It's now been replaced, but about 40 years ago, we did a heavy repair on it. And because Nottingham didn't have a very strong steel gang, we went up to where we thought would have a strong steel gang, even though it was a different region. And Sheffield helped us out. They would have a steel gang in Sheffield, wouldn't they? And they were excellent. And they would come down. We were working night shifts and day shifts. They would come down on the night shifts. These new plates here that we were putting in, they'd come on the night shift. They'd take a template of them. They'd take it back to their own shops at Woodburn, pop it into the shops on the morning they got home, go off to bed, pick it up in the evening, the fresh steel to go in, bring it back, put it up the next night. These were our few lads who kept the job going in the day, but the heavier stuff was done on nights. And again, we managed to pinch a bit of design work into our office. So we needed new cross girders, so we were allowed to design them. Not all the cross girders, just the worst ones. And we replaced jack arches with concrete decks. And the only bit of contract we used on it was actually the resurfacing of the road at the end of it. And one more, yes, please. One more while I'm talking about enjoying the jobs with the railway workers. And again, it involved the steel gang at Sheffield. This beautiful footbridge is at Oakham Level Crossing. It's right next to the signal box, which features in Hornby Dublo trains and that sort of thing. But it's right in the centre of an old town, Oakham. So we wanted to make a good job when we needed to repair it. And we took it down. It was in a bit of a shocking state, needed a lot of steel repairs on it. But we took it down, put it on a train, took it to San Diego Yard. I talked to the people at Sheffield. Can you still do riveting? Well, they said, we haven't done it for years, but there's a couple of lads still know how to do it. And I think we can dig the gear out. So when we did, and the only job I've ever done, instead of using bolts for the repairs, we riveted it. And it looked a picture. Oakham, it took a bit longer than we said, I have to say. And the good people of Oakham wrote to the local paper and said, we don't think BR are ever going to put this footbridge back, because they were having to wait at the crossing gates then and hadn't got a bridge to use. But it did eventually go back. If you go there today, you can actually see what it would have looked like had we used bolts, because it's been raised for Freightliner something, and very bottom bits have had bits added on which have been bolted on, and that's fine because you don't really see them, they're right low, but bolts are quite obtrusive when you compare them with rivet heads. That's just another job that I did, and I was proud to have done, and had the railway staff to do it. Okay. I did spend the time on the building section. When I first went to Nottingham in 1971, I was put on the building section, which I didn't really like. You know, most of the time it seemed to be going out to Tote and Loco trying to find leaks in the bloody roof and things like that. But the very next year, 1972, in the August, I got called into the boss's office and they said, you're going to build a station. At that time, I think I'm right in saying that the only recent build of a station was Bristol Parkway. And this one was eventually to be called a parkway as well. But it was at a time when very, very few new stations were being built and the railway was still really contracting a bit. Well, this one was at Alfreton, and it was to be called Alfreton and Mansfield Parkway, because at that time Mansfield had no station. It's got one now, so it's now just called Alfreton. But I put it in because very nicely in this August meeting, they said, right, it's your job, along with my gaffer, to build this station. I just want to tell you that the timetable change on May the 7th next year has been set, and that's when this station has been built into the timetable for. So bearing in mind that on that August day, all I got was a drawing provided by the railway architect, which was very nice in the pretty trees and things, but didn't actually tell you how to build the station. So from the August, we had to do site surveys, site levels, sort out the various services on site, do engineering drawings for the work and get it built. And this time we used what was called the DLO, which was a Midland region organisation of railway people, but they were employed on construction industry terms, and they had been established for the electrification of the West Coast Main Line. And our nearest depot to that was Birmingham, Camp Hill. And after the electrification, they carried on doing major projects for the railway, which were beyond the capabilities of our local staff, but avoided letting contracts. And they did this one for us. The Erie-Wash Valley, which this is on, is a main line. At the time, it was carrying one train in each direction every hour from Sheffield to London, plus freight. But although it was officially something like an 80-mile-an-hour line, it was so beset with colliery subsidence, the timetables over it were a bit slack. So our operating department, who were desperate to open this station, you know, they promised Notts County Council and whoever else that it would open on this date, were very cooperative with what we did. So to build the platform walls, they agreed we could do it between trains weekdays, and they would provide an ops man on site who would see that the protection, that the signals remained at danger either side of us and the protection put down until the trains drew close. He'd then ask us to stop work, we'd get off, protection would be cleared and the trains would be allowed through. And that allowed us, if you think about it, to probably work for 45 minutes every hour, instead of, if we'd have had to come out in the normal way, get out, you're not delaying the trains, we'd have been lucky to get 30 minutes an hour work. So that was a big help. Built with traditional block and copings, all the concrete stuff coming from Taunton Depot, of course, who supplied us with all our concrete units. New car park. The fill to the platforms was courtesy of my colleagues on the P-Way side, who took ballast trains full of spent ballast straight off a relane site, and we unloaded them to fill the platforms as well. But that kept the cost down nicely. And yeah, the station has changed very little. That's what it was then. We did open on time, just. I didn't get invited to the opening. Board chairman came down. It's probably Parker at the time. Yeah, he came and the other dignitaries, but I did go to the station before the grand opening and make sure the cleaning had been done, and then I did watch it being done in the background. Anyway, I took this photo recently. Apart from a proliferation of vegetation, the station has changed very little. That's the original fencing. It's the original bridge. I was told, because I mentioned this in a meeting the other day, that they have just started to install lifts there for disabled access, which is a good thing, because obviously years ago the Barrow crossing was taken out, as they have been, and so for some years there'd been no disabled access, but that's now been sorted out, and there are 2 trains an hour in each direction calling there now, and it gets on very well. There was one tale about it after it had opened. It's approximately 9 miles from Mansfield, which is quite a stretch, isn't it? But I was told, and I was told it was true, that when Mansfield had a home game and the away fans were coming, the police were known to let them come on the train to Mansfield and then walk them to this station and then walk them all the way to Mansfield. I don't think that can be true, but I was assured it is. Okay, so bit of a spell on bridges. Another of my favourite things is tunnels. This is Peacecliff Tunnel, just north of Grantham. It's the first tunnel I ever went in, but it's not when those trains were running, it was when steam trains were still running. 64, quite a lot of East Coast Main Line steam trains, passenger trains were still run by steam as far south as either the Grantham or Peterborough. They didn't go beyond Peterborough because of clean air stuff at King's Cross, but there was still a lot of steam. And I can still remember the first time I was in there and being hoisted into a refuge and this bloody steam thing going by with a whoosh and smoke and fire. And I've loved them ever since. I think they're absolutely great. After I retired from BR and we formed our own company, I was hired in, and several other of people we got hold of were hired in by the inspection contractors to do their tunnel inspections for them, because obviously you need to be qualified for that, and I'd been done under BR. You had to be a chartered engineer for a start, and so I got my qualifications. So for a period of 10 years I was going out on a Saturday night to tunnels all around the country. I went as far north as Whitehaven, and certainly all the way, every tunnel on the Settle in Carlisle I've done, and thoroughly enjoyed it, apart from the long drives, of course. And yeah, tunnels in general have always fascinated me, and how they're repaired. If you want to just... And one little story that I'll tell very quickly. This was the tunnel train for Nottingham Division, with a nice scaffold mounted, permanently mounted on a wagon that could be extended to reach various parts of the tunnel. When I got to Peterborough, they haven't got one, and they've got loads of tunnels. The East Coast Main Line coming out of King's Cross got plenty of tunnels, a lot of tunnel work. So I was determined that we should have a good tunnel train. And I cast round, and we did a few searches, and I got people to go into Tops and see what they could find. And they find a couple of 60-foot long bogie vehicles that had been built from passenger coach bodies, but which were designed to carry bullion. And apparently there was a contract at one time, presumably, I guess, with the Royal Mint, I don't know, but a contract to attach these, put small containers on this with bullion and attach it to passenger trains to be moved about the country. And I gather they did very little work before it was decided it wasn't a very good thing to do for whatever reason. And they sat in a yard mouldering away, and we found them and we said, can we have a couple of wagons, please? And they said, yeah, I'll take them, you know, we don't want them. So they were moved. Somebody inspected them for us so that they could be moved. I think we got them from somewhere over in the Western region, but I can't be sure on that. Anyway, we brought them to our depot at Palace Gates in North London, and we got SGB, who had done this scaffold, to design us a full scaffold, which was all the full length of the wagon, but in gauge. And then we hooked it up to GUV wagons, the covered wagons with the end doors, and we put the scaffold extras in there to go onto it. And we had Grampus with permanent compressors in and generators. We piped it up for air and wired it out for lighting, so that once it got to site, you just start the generator up and you got lights on the job. We had a mess van with it. Yeah, lovely job. We thought we've done a good job here. Didn't cost too much, really. You know, I mean, a lot of it was help yourself stuff. The only thing was, to get the wagons from Palace Gates back up to Peterborough, where we were going to attach them to the other wagons and make the trains up. We were intercity at the time, and intercity weren't relying on anybody else for locos. Even for engineering work, we had our own locos. So then we sent a Class 47 down to pick the wagons up. Class 47s can travel at 95 miles an hour. Our tunnel train was still rated at 100 miles an hour because I'd seen no, we not downrated it from its original purpose. And I'm sat in the office talking to the bridge assistant. I said, we should see the tunnel train go by the office in a few minutes. It's coming up from Palace Gates. Yes, he said. And it suddenly dawned on me that there was no reason why that driver shouldn't drive it at full speed all the way back to Peterborough. I just had visions because not only had we put the scaffold up, but because we were on an overhead line area, we'd have to put plywood sideboards on to prevent vandals climbing on and this sort of thing. I could just imagine huge pieces of plywood floating about. Anyway, it turned up, it didn't, and we downgraded it, I think, to 60 miles an hour after that or something like that. And yeah, it was a real asset. Again, I'm sorry, I'm going to belabor this point, but come privatisation, just before privatisation, the guys from the company or the division at Derby who were to certify wagons fit to use, I forget what they were called now, came and saw me and said, you've got to pay us X amount of money to keep these wagons on the line because we're going to have to inspect them and that. And I thought, all right, well, nobody's done it before, but then when full privatisation came along, again, contractors won't use them. They said they can't afford the locos to move them about and so on. And this came home to me a few months into privatisation, maybe a year into it, when our little company was hired in to provide some supervision and inspection of work being done for rail track under contract, repairing the tunnels. And these poor blokes came in with a couple of push-ute trolleys with some quick lift scaffold on it, small generators, little hammers that worked off the generators rather than compressed air ones. And really, they got nothing done. Even the jackhammers they were using wouldn't knock the brickwork out. And it just a shame that they threw away a lot of good things, perhaps, to get something less good. I'm sure now things have changed a lot. It was a time of change. Okay, we'll talk about diving in a few minutes, if that's all right with you. I mentioned that I joined the diving team in 1968, when I moved to Leicester. It was established in 1992. But if we go back before that and talk about the history of railway diving, there was a time when the only organisation in the country that had more divers than British Railways was the Navy. And that is because, of course, the railways owned an awful number of ferry ports, and even some of the major docks were originally built by railway companies. So they needed the people in the docks. And these were generally artisans who were either mainly carpenters, actually, because they'd been involved in piling and this sort of thing, who were trained as divers as well. And if you go right back in history, when the Severn Tunnel was being built, there's quite a very interesting article about a really brave diver who sort of saved that project by going underground through the flooded workings after the Great Spring had deluged the workings when Severn Tunnel was being built, and he went in there to block the where the water was coming in and shut valves and this sort of thing. And so railway diving has been there the whole time that there's been a railway. There's the book about the Tay Bridge disaster also gives a lot of mention to the divers who worked there to recover bodies and that sort of thing. And they worked using this equipment right up until the 1960s. That helmet is an ex-railway helmet. It was made in 1951 for the railway.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
and I apologise, but our regular train home has been cancelled.
Oh, right. Okay.
We've got it set off now.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed what you heard.
Yeah, totally.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, so it was used right up until the 1950s. And if you did want to read the book, I've written a bit of history about that particular helmet and how it was used. But in 1962, the engineer at Derby South, who was a keen scuba diver himself, and in about 1962, was just about the time when scuba became available to the average guy. I mean, it had been about since the wartime and so forth, but it was mostly military. Then along came Jacques Cousteau and people like that. Jacques Cousteau developed the Mistral valve, which is the one we used. And so it became accessible. And this engineer at Derby, Mr. Johns, was a keen scuba diver, and he set up the team because he could see this stuff's all right in the docks where you're on top of a dock and you've got people on it. But you inspect a railway bridge with that gear, it is a right ball ache. You've got to get a boat out and all sorts of things, where a scuba can just walk along a riverbank and he can go in and he can do the inspections. So we set it up. He set up the team at Derby, and around about the same time, they had the same idea in Scotland. So there was a team in Scotland and there was one on the southern region. And using this type of gear, you can see how easy it is to inspect things by comparison with the old stuff. That's a weir over the River Trent. That's Brian Garner again. I don't know who that is in there, but yeah. So I joined that team and had many happy years working with them. There's lots of divers' tales. Like most people, you get a group of people doing a particular job and there's all sorts of tales to tell about it. But there's a serious side as well. We helped write the group standard for diving, which was then adapted into the conditions of contract for diving companies after privatisation. We inspected quite a few structures on the Heart of Wales line after the collapse of the bridge at Llanryd, which was caused by bridge scour, and we involved ourselves with the hydraulics research people at Wallingford in how to establish scour detectors and monitor scour, because that was and still remains quite a problem with railway structures over, or any bridge over a fast flowing river. And although on the main lines the bridges are fairly deeply founded, some of the less main lines, the lesser lines, the foundations are the sort of things you put on a house. They're just a strip of stone foundation just below the riverbed level. So it's quite important to monitor that as well as doing the inspections. Anyway, we carried on inspecting structures using scuba until the mid-80s, when the dreaded Health and Safety at Work Act people came along. And they said, actually, our rules will be, we're not going to tell you how to do the examinations, but what we're going to say to you is that any diver, professional diver at work, must have continuous supply of air available to him in the event of him not being able to surface, which of course you can't provide with scuba. So we then had to go into this surface demand equipment, which is much bigger, much heavier, sort of almost going back to the days of the big metal helmet. And the trouble with that, of course, it made you look rather silly because you got all that gear on. Yes, please. And that's what you look like. You're standing up in the middle of the river. So we did manage to adapt it. What we decided was that we would be compliant, and bearing in mind, I would think 75% of the work we did, if you stood up, your head would be above the water. And we said, right, we can use scuba because he will have a continuous supply of air if he stands up. And that's around the rules. But we did use it a lot, and very much towards, and I like most of these things, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Safety rules. And towards the end of my career diving, I was working, that's Holyhead where we worked a lot, but if you move it on one more, I was working on the Hungerford Bridge in central London, and that's had two walkways put either side of it. And whilst they were constructing those walkways, and it was while we were Bridgeway, it was after BR, we were inspecting the work that they were doing on behalf of, I think it must have been Railtrack at the time, to check that they weren't causing any damage. And unfortunately, each of these sides below water is linked by concrete beams on the riverbed. And in lowering one, they damaged one of the cast iron columns that carries the railway bridge. Just knocked a piece out of it. Anyway, they got specialist contractors in to do a cast iron repair underwater to this thing, and we checked it afterwards, and it looked good, and which amazed me really, because cast iron's not easy to repair at the best of times. But they did do a good job of the repair. And a year or so later, we were employed to do the routine inspection, and I said, well, we've got to get down and make sure we see the bit that was damaged before. I want to see that it's okay, and I'm personally going to have a look at it. So when you're on the Thames, you get maybe 20 minutes of slack water at each turn of tide, and that's the only time that it's safe to dive, otherwise it's running far too fast. So I went down with my surface demand trailing me bloody umbilical behind me. Went down was the practice was to go down while it was still running a bit quick in the lee of a pier, and then when it's slowed enough, you go around and do your exam until, because you are connected by phone to the surface, until they say it's time to come up. So I went down that and I followed it round, and the contractors, bless them, had left every bit of debris you could imagine on the bed, with protruding reinforcing bars and scaffold bars and things. And I found, having gone down and under half a dozen obstructions, I found the repair. It was still good. About that time, I got a call to come up, and I went to go back, and I couldn't move. And not only couldn't I move because my umbilical had been trapped, the lads on the top, knowing that I was coming up, were pulling on the umbilical to help me come up, and I was stuck, and the umbilical wrapped itself round a reinforcing bar, and it cut my hair off. Fortunately, we carry a little bottle of air with about 10 minutes in it, and I told them to stop pulling. I was still in touch. Supervisor at the top was having eggs because he could see on the gauges that I wasn't taking any air anymore. And, you know, it's not as desperate as it sounds, because it's like anything. You follow the route, you come out and you find where the problem is and you resolve it and all sorted. But I did reflect later that I was quite pleased it was me having had 40 years experience and not me, my first dive down, because I wouldn't have been I'd have been panicking like bloody mad. But anyway, that's diving. And Bridgeway, when we founded it, it was the first job we intended to do. In fact, initially we thought it would be the only job we got to do, but fortunately we got other work as well. So I'll mention now, you can move it onward if you like, what happened at privatisation. At the time, I was AACE Works at Peterborough, and we were working like mad to try and get our organisation fit for privatisation. And we'd done one outside work on contract. We'd done a lot of work for Network South East off our own patch to try and get us so that we could form a unit to, I don't know, a buyout or whatever. But along came the powers that be and said, look, we don't want you. We want the units who do the P-way because we need their expertise, and they will be formed and go off to Balfour or whoever. But quite frankly, we can go to any old contractor to do your job. They've got bricklayers, carpenters. We don't need you. So you've got no chance. So bit upset at the time, upset more for the lads than the others, but it prompted me to say, right, thank you very much. I'll have me redundancy money. And that's how we came to set up Bridgeway, of which the purpose was to carry on doing a decent job in the rail industry. And fortunately, within a few months of us being formed, consultants and contractors that had took on work for Railtrack started to need people who had already been in the industry. They needed work supervisors. They need people to look after their contractors who were doing bridge reconstructions, this sort of thing. And gradually, I managed to take into employment quite a few of the supervisors that had been working with me on BR. And I think we had about 20 of those at one time from all over the patch. And I won't belabour this part anymore, but one day the guys at Railtrack said, you know, when we give a contract to, he mentioned the company White Young Green, who were big consultants, he said, whenever we give them a job, it's always Bridgeway staff that come and do the work. So would you like to have a go yourselves? We said, thank you very much. And that's how the company grew. I'm conscious of the time. I've had an hour. I'll just another few minutes. All right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to really finish off and just clicking through a few pictures of other things that are in the book. I talk a lot about steam cranes. I absolutely loved using steam cranes. At a time when the biggest road mobile crane would maybe lift about 10 tons, these things would lift 75 tons with such precision. That was amazing. But also they caused a hell of a lot of noise and the smoke and steam. And the poor guy working it can't see a bloody thing. He's covered in, and I really loved it. And there is a story in the book of quite an interesting incident with one of them down at Harringay in London, and we nearly tipped one over. But I won't go into that one. Click on again. This is us using the local drainage board came on to us in the office to say, could we facilitate them getting to their HIMAC, which had sunk into the bed of the street next to the docks. And after a bit of shenanigans, I said, well, you can't do anything on what you're suggesting, but I'll tell you what, we'll send you a crane and lift it out. So our friends at Totem sent the steam crane and shocked them a bit, I think, when they saw a steam crane working. But lifted it out and carried it out for them. Another very brief story, it is in the book, was Lady Elton's Bridge. And I got called Lady Elton's personal engineer for a while. This bridge here, which is in the photo, spanned the Midland Main Line and it connected two parts of the land that belonged to Sutton Bonington Hall. And her ladyship, who was well known to be a Tartar, had not been consulted by the chief civil engineers when they decided they'd replace her decorative bridge with a nice plain welded one, and she flatly refused to have it done. So I was in a bit of a mess. The bridge was already being fabricated, the possessions had already been set, we'd been given the job and told to get on with it. What do? We had a site meeting with her, which she turned up on a huge black horse, dressed totally in the most beautiful blue riding gear, with top hat style riding hat and a veil, which she never took off, and she never got off the horse. The meeting consisted of myself, a guy from the British Railways Property Board to talk about land rights and whatever, her agent and her ladyship. The guy from the property board was so scared of the horse, every time it moved, he moved further back and we had to shout to him. The upshot, very briefly, the upshot was we eventually came to a compromise because we realised she didn't need the full width of the bridge. So we took the old bridge down, steam cranes again, put the new bridge on. That's what you can see through the lattice work. And when we'd done all that, we took the old girders away. We did a small repair on them because it was decorative then. Got them blast cleaned and painted, brought back and put on. Actually, reversed because they are the outside outriggers. So we swapped the girders over, so that's on the inside, and that satisfied her ladyship. And it's a bit longer story than that, but I went back to take these photos and I asked permission to go up, and I was talking to this chap and he said permission. And as I'm working up, another lady stopped me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, I explained this to her. She said, "Oh, you're talking about my book." Anyway, that's the tale of that. Keep going. I won't bother you too much more because time's getting on. That's a picture of a culvert on the canal, which what happened was we were repairing and reconstructing the bridge on the main line, but prior to reconstruction we were repairing the piers. They sent the apprentice in the dumper down to get chips, and it was one of these backsteer little jumpers. And when he got to the canal, he turned it the wrong way and went straight into the canal. So anyway, he got out. I went down with another colleague with our diving gear on just to attached some chains to the dumper, got a little road mobile, came down, lifted it out. British Waterways Board, we thought, were none the wiser. I went off. Bloke from the plant depot came down and got the dumper working. That went off. Unfortunately, just as it was leaving, the crane burst a tyre. And because he burst a tyre, he put his outrigger out to lift the wheel up, which went straight through. So we went back again, and I went back, and we got Derek Blaine, who was the brickie, to help, and we crawled up the canal, and still without letting them know, we managed to repair it, and we got away with it. The thing was, this bit, they'd given us permission to get down part of the towpath and then across the field, but this wasn't a part that they'd even given us permission to be on. And I don't know what it was like with you, but ourselves and British Waterways Board were not always in sync, considering we were both private public industries. We didn't always get on with each other.
What was the location of that canal?
That's the it's Loughborough. It's just north of Loughborough. It's part of what is called the River Soar Navigation,
Yeah,
which is partly,
yeah,
as you perhaps know, river and partly canal.
yeah.
And that's the canal part of it. Yeah, yeah. And that photo of the culvert I took quite recently just to see that it was still there. That's just another reconstruction. There's a tale about that in the book. Carry on. This one I will mention because I also used to like the fun of attending to call out. So this is a bridge in Hinckley, which got hit by an excavator on the back of a lorry and virtually destroyed.
Wow.
Unfortunately, there's a scrapyard near there, and a guy from the scrapyard saw what happened and ran up on the railway embankment and stopped trains. Otherwise, it would have been worse. Anyway, again, I was in the bridge section. I wasn't allocated that job, but I was asked to help out by the guy who was, Alan. And what we did was, fortunately, we got 2 sets of wave beams and longitudinal girders already that were the right size. So if you move on one, and that's 1 set of them. So we were able to start putting that in as soon as the powers that be would let us. There was a bit of a hiatus where they wanted photos and were worried about insurance and that. But we put the ones on stock that should have gone back to Newton Heath that hadn't. We put those in, and Newton Heath sent us another pair down, which was in the stock kept there for this very purpose, and we put those in. So we were able to reopen the line within a couple of days, which we were quite pleased with, really. And again, it's sort of the thing that was actually available to us in those days. Stocks of military trestling, stocks of temporary girders and things were there to be used. That was another call out because I did a lot of bridge bash call outs, particularly in Bridgeway days, because I lived near Grantham and that's notorious. And mostly they're a bit of fun and a bit of money in your pocket. And railway bridges are very rarely damaged by it. But when Control called me up for that one, I could tell they were being very sombre because they said, I don't know what you're going to find, Brian, when you get there. All we know is it's a bus load of school children have gone onto the bridge. Takes me about 15 minutes to 20 minutes to drive there, and I was scared to death of what I would find. As luck would have it, not a scratch. Fortunately, it was a party of small children. Downstairs and upstairs were full. A teacher on the bus was standing on the staircase, probably keeping an eye on the ones at the top, saw what was going to happen, told them all to duck down. The bus sailed under and finished like that. The roof of the bus is the other side of the bridge, and there wasn't a single serious accident or a scene. Yeah, I don't think any even went to hospital, to be honest, because when I got there, which wasn't that long after it, all there was a couple of police directing traffic. No ambulances or anything. I was so relieved. And one more to finish off. That's New Barnet Station in London. This whole structure burnt down. This booking office, waiting room and all that on a bridge with staircases down to the platforms. One Friday night, it was set alight by vandals. And it happened to be my weekend on call. And I hadn't been in Peterborough very long. So I drove down there and got down there to find local assistant work supervisor on site with a few men. and the fire brigade's still there damping down. So, without any prompting from me, the assistant super started gathering men in and materials and things and started clearing away all the debris from the fire. The staircases had vanished completely. They were burnt down. A little bit later, Bernard Dawson, who was the gaffer at Hitchin Depot, the senior supervisor, who was not on call, arrived on site and said, "Why the bloody hell didn't you call me out, Brian?" I said, "Well, you're not on call, Bernard." "I don't care, it's my, typical railway attitude." But he was brilliant. We gathered all the timber we could to put a temporary surface, enough for a footbridge wide route across the bridge. He even got painters out to paint the handrails, all this sort of thing. I left that all to him. They got timber from our depot at Palace Gates, from our Peterborough depot that was brought down. The ballast train was brought in to load the old timber onto to get rid of it. But staircases were another matter. And I hadn't been there very long at Peterborough, so I wasn't totally aware of where I could go to. Unfortunately, after trying a couple of times with the major scaffolders, this is sort of 8 o'clock Saturday morning by then, and not having any luck, I talked to our bridge assistant who'd been there a lot longer, and he said, "Oh, you need Mickey Prendy." "Oh, right, who's Mickey Prendy?" I sort of knew. And there was a firm called Prendy Scaffolding in East London, run by a guy called Mickey Prendergast. And he said, "I'll ring him for you." Well, within an hour, he was over there. He sized up the situation. He said, "Yeah, we'll have that done for you." He came with all the scaffolding, built 2 new staircases for us. By Sunday morning, he got 2 staircases in, which were still there 10 years later. It took him more than 10 years to put permanent staircases in. Anyway, on the Saturday afternoon, the ops manager came up to me and said, "Well, you need to tell me, because we've got to arrange the planning of the trains and that, when I can have the station back. I think it'll be 2 weeks, will it?" And I was full of bravado. Then one night I said, "No, shall we say 6 o'clock Monday morning in time for the peak?" "Oh, right," he said, "fine." I then thought, Jesus, what have I said? But anyway, we got it done. He was so chuffed. A bit later on, a passenger train came up and stopped at the station, and I thought, it's not supposed to be stopping here. And out popped a couple of people with big hampers of food that he'd scrounged from the buffet and put on the train for us to eat. And yeah, it was just one of those railway jobs where you enjoy it and you turn what could have been disaster into something of a success. And I quite would have liked to have been one of the commuters at 6 o'clock Monday morning, walking down there, having come away from that and gone back to find something entirely different. Anyway, I won't keep any more of your time. Thanks very much for listening to me. And if you do want a book, I can sell you one.
Thank you very much, Brian.
You're welcome.
That put wonderful words to the picture, which I would say I've seen. We checked them out. Excellent.
Oh, I tell you what I should have mentioned. I know the proceeds from the sale of the book go to the Railway Children's Charity, which many of you will have heard of. Even if you don't want a book, but you feel like you put a donation, you can just pop it on there for that. I'll leave that on there.
Okay, I mean, a lot came out there, some really interesting things. Do we have any questions? If there's anyone at home that wants a question, just raise a hand and I'll come to you. Anyone in the room got any questions? Rodney, go ahead.
I have this vague recollection, as I said to you before, that you did come to Reading and do some diving once.
Yeah, I think.
And this may be a question more for Richard, who was on the work side. We never had a diving team, did we?
Only at Fishguard Harbour.
Yeah.
Yeah, and John Davis at Fishguard was.
That's in the docks, I suppose. But can you remember what you did in the Reading area?
I seem to recall we did quite a few bridges where the line ran parallel for the Kennington Avon Canal further to the west. I can't remember myself coming to Reading itself. I don't think as BR divers, we ever came to the Western region. I'm sure they looked after themselves, and as did other parts of the Midland by using contract divers, because we weren't big enough to cover the whole country by any means. So I don't know. And the ones along the Kennington Avon, that was done while we were British diving.
Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering whether the Western structures being built by Brunel were built so solid that.
Well,
you said that.
However, I would point out that the Clan Bridge did go down on the Heart of Wales line, which
Yeah.
I think is Western, is it? Or is it? Or
It is, yes, it was, yes.
It was
I was there that one.
Well, the bridge itself was designed by Frank Leeming, who was in the bridge office at the time as a draftsman. And he became the bridge engineer in Paddington and went on to very senior things elsewhere. So, yes, it was Western Region at one stage. I was involved with the reconstruction of that. And
we hadn't.
And the diving that was done to examine but I don't know who did the diving. Doing the whole survey post.
No, we were, and this was BR days, we came down, we didn't go to that bridge, but before the line was reopened, we were asked to examine several other bridges further along the line.
Yeah. There was a big push for scour protection. We did lots of bridges down, particularly in West Wales.
Yeah. So.
Phil,
It's not a question, it's an interesting anecdote that is relevant to your presentation. A few years ago, if any of you will recall, I gave a presentation about my work on Acton Dive Under. Interesting story that I think I told everyone here, if you remember it from my presentation, but obviously Brian wouldn't see it. One Christmas, we had two major contractors on site. We had Bam Nuttall, who were building the actual dive under, doing all the piling and all the excavation. We had Carillion, who were doing all the rail systems work, so all the work around the yard, remodelling it in many stages. Get to the end of December, a week or so before Christmas, the Bam Nuttall shut down. It's concrete. We can shut down at Christmas. Doesn't matter. We've got a very deep hole in the ground, and it's got pumping network going out. Carillion coming over Christmas, and they do lots of renewals works, lots of digging holes in the ground, and then of course January the 5th or January the 6th, whatever it was, Bam Nuttall come back on site, and the dive under's under about 8 feet of water. How did that happen? And there's the equipment down the bottom and things. Just so it happened that one of the lead engineers from Bam Nuttall was a diver. So he went, no problem, went home, a few hours later, came back with a scuba gear, dived down into the dive under, found the cable that had been cut, rigged up all the new stuff and got all the pumps working again. Excellent. It's like, that could have been a major incident that we called out lots of contractors for, but actually it was just like, I'm back in a few hours. So it's just sorted. It's interesting the skill set, because railway and diving didn't really appreciate the link, but actually, it brought back some good memories for them.
There was a job at Trent, actually quite near the weir that I showed on there, that was scale protection being put down by contractors, and the contractor's site agent was a scuba diver, and we as a railway team were sent there to supervise the work they were doing. But we came to an agreement that ourselves and their agent would put the mattresses down, and instead of them doing it and we supervising, we just worked together and put them down. And the contractors, of course, said, well, we can pay you for that. I said, no, you can't pay us for that. The railway would skin us. But we came to an agreement with the approval of the railway and our gaffers that it could be done like that. In recognition of the fact, again, with the approval of the railway, the contractors took ourselves and our wives out for a slap-up meal at the end of the job. But it was, as you say, the way the contract was formed, it actually saved the company money as well. It wasn't, totally lost to the railway, the fact that we went and helped do it. Yeah.
Malcolm?
Going back to your comments about Bob Clark and so on.
Yeah.
Which were very interesting to me at the time, but I knew Bob pretty well because of what we did on the West Coast Main Line in a very similar way to what you did on the East Coast. But the most important thing was in those sort of intercity days, and it was the same thing with Chris Green south of the river as well. They were entrepreneurs, those people.
Yeah.
They knew what they wanted and how to run a business, and it was a really pleasant thing to be associated with those sort of people, and you got all the encouragement to be able to do these things.
Absolutely.
And you really felt part of it. What really I feel I enjoyed all those sorts of things that we did during that time. Well, they all fell apart in 1996, didn't they? It just stopped being used. And now everything's just being reinvented. Oh, well, yeah, we now do this. And this is a world leader. And we were already doing it in the 1980s. And it just disappeared back in the middle of the 1990s, didn't it? And so much stuff, not just the P-way stuff, but all sorts of things. This family disappeared. It really did. And the way that we used to do work, the way that you were talking about getting that bridge at New Barnet back in again. When you think about something like that happening now, you wouldn't even be saying a fortnight, you'd probably be saying 6 months to get that done, with all the things that have to be done and gone through to deal with it. All we were charged with that sort of thing, you got yourself on site, how quickly can we make our way back? And you just did it. And people from the research, Michael, the investigators anyway, from the research at Derby, they would just work around you to try and come up with the answers to the problem, while you were getting on with getting the railway back open again. Because the important thing always was get the railway open. That's what we're all about. Now we spend a fortnight closing main lines, don't we? You know.
But it's so much safer, isn't it?
No, I'm not complaining about that, but you brought up a lot of things there whereby you always had the people who you could just get together and they appeared on site. It didn't matter whether they're on call or not. Close by, they heard about it. I can help with this. I will do this. And it wasn't just we'll go and we're going to go and we'll provide the help and all that sort of thing. They really wanted to do it. It mattered to them to be able to go and do it. And it was like that for years and years and years. It's a shame that that sort of thing has stopped now, and it's not just because of health and safety and that sort of thing. It's just the general attitude to risk now, and that nobody is allowed to just do what professionally they said, well, carry on and do.
Risk and liability is sold off in contracts now, and it's a very different way of working.
Yeah.
If I may echo a bit of what you're saying there, from perspective for the modern world, there is some good stuff absolutely in the modern way of doing it, and the risk in contract and the safety but I regularly think this has gone too far, and the camaraderie that you describe very accurately there, just in little circles, it's there still. I have colleagues that we will absolutely work really hard and find things and make phone calls and try and figure something out when things go wrong, but on the whole, it's, that's not in my contract. The number of times that, but that's not my responsibility area. That you need to go and find someone else, and I'm off chasing different companies and different that's not in scope. Well, okay, I can be there tomorrow. It's just there is a level of, I'm sure, there's a lot of good stuff you painted there, but actually, where were the accidents and where were the people hurt? Where did things fall apart and things go wrong? And I'm sure some of that is there, and probably doesn't make the historical book, but undoubtedly people did get hurt, and I'm not saying it's all wrong by a long shot. It was brilliant in many ways, but there is that level of protection and better safety, but actually we've lost a lot by going there as well, and the ability to pull together a team at short notice, the ability to just solve problems. One What was the time period on that station? Was that genuinely like 6 or 7 months, did you say? I think it was
It was 9 months. August,
months.
August when I was first told about it, the following May the 7th it opened.
Wow. Now,
That didn't seem unusual at the time, but I've since read articles of stations that have taken years.
well, until about 5 or 6 months ago, I was the lead engineer for what will be Cambridge South when it actually opens finally. That this coming Christmas will hit the 3 years in construction mark. But the public date is that it's going to open in January, which isn't going to happen, but I can't tell you that. So and a few more months probably on there. But yeah, that's 3 and a bit years to opening, and that's pretty good. I currently work on Old Oak Common. We started construction in 2022, and yeah, it's going to be a while. It's going to be
I may ask you, well, how much do you think this is because of the systems you have now, the things you've outlined? But is some of it not gilding the lily on what you're doing? I mean, I mentioned Alfred Station, you couldn't be more basic.
Yeah,
The buildings were, Notts County Council have developed this system called CLASP for precast buildings for sports centres and that. Because they were paying for part of the station, they insisted on that being used.
Yeah.
The job. Well, that was beautiful because it was easy to erect, and but it is very simple. And the station platforms are just platforms with wooden fencing, you know. So,
yeah, very little else. Yeah, it was.
and
Yeah, it's a very different world now.
platform and a bush shelter for a waiting shed.
Yeah, I mean, Cambridge South is 4 platforms, and it's supposed to be a landmark station. It's nice timber roof, curved, curved structure, and well, of course, all the modern. You've got the comm systems, the fire protection systems you have to build in. It all takes a long time. So yeah, there is quite a difference, but even so, that would be absolutely those timescales are absolutely impossible today. That's
Well, in 1986, we built Tiverton Parkway in 9 months.
Right, that's
Wow.
That's good. That's good. Yeah.
So
concept to me,
it's a complete culture change. That's what's happened. That it's a no can do. Sorry, can't do that because regulations. Everything's been regulated out of all recognition. Rules, regulations, specifications. What is it they call about? You have to get a divergence from what's it called?
non-conformance, deviation.
Derogation.
Derogation. When some project manager looking at a load of words he doesn't really understand says, what you're doing isn't exactly in line with, it's a nonsense.
Yeah.
It's not being run by engineers anymore. It's by project managers who only know programming and not very well. And really have never done anything in the engineering industry, never built anything, never actually created anything, never even thought of anything to create. That's where it's all gone. I'm glad.
I think just following on from that, I think you hit the nail on the head with it about having a traffic inspector there and using the rules which were there to enable you to do the work like that. You didn't break the rules, you used the rules. The thing was, you had to have people that trusted each other to do the job out of the different departments.
Yeah.
And each bit with all of it, which didn't matter which department you worked for, whatever it was, you all just got together on site, decided what you wanted to do, wrote some minutes up, and it all started to happen. That's how it works. You cannot do that now, and I understand why a lot of the time you can't, because they are not local people who work together. They're brought in from anywhere else to do. So they will have to work to a specific pattern and so on. And you cannot, because they're not railway people, you don't understand the railway rules. And you can't then interpret them in the proper way as the way they were supposed to be used. I mean, the way that we were doing that, like that's working like a T2, that was on the way that he was talking with that in accordance with the rule book. You could put that in, provided it went into the notice and so on, which you had to know what you were doing with it, and you needed cooperation from the signalman as well. Because he had to trust that when he said to you, I've got a train online, get out of the way, you did. And if you didn't do, your job started to go down. You had to trust each other and do it.
Matthew.
I've got a diving question.
Yeah.
You said you did visual inspections. Did you
Yes.
also record those, and how did you do those underwater? Did you do underwater photography as well, and any other electronic?
The day-to-day regular inspections were just done mainly by feel because the visibility is pretty poor in most railway situations, and producing drawings from your memory as you've done them when you got back up to the surface. And that was for the majority of the work, to be quite honest. Once we got onto the surface demand, then we could, on the longer jobs, such as harbour walls and so forth, you could have a scribe above if you were describing him. We did have underwater cameras, but in most of the conditions that wasn't, you couldn't take a photo.
Did you say that you actually did the diving at camp and read the inspection after the?
No, we didn't. No, we did. Several bridges along the river further up, and there was one which had a cast iron cylinder support. And what we found was that, and it was a stone riverbed, and the stone had either eroded away or it had never been down to a level point. So as the stone on the riverbed was like that, and the cast iron, bottom of the cast iron had gone down like that, so the support was on only one side of the cast iron. It was, and the gap the other side, you could actually get inside. So I think that was repaired during the time that the line was shut.
Yeah, we did that with cement bags.
That was the one we found. We also broke the propeller on our boat. we got for the first time they given us a brand new motor for our dinghy, because mostly we had to push it along, and we set off from wherever the access was to the bridge, and we chugged along and everything was fine. And Colin, who was driving it, said, well, that's all right, there's no stones, that won't hurt us. Then we know. And when he went back, he opened it up, and of course, if you opened it up, the back probably went down. Smashed the propeller on the stones at the back.
Okay.
Well, then forgive us.
On that note,
Yes.
time is running away with us. So I think we'll draw it to a close there, unless there's any last burning questions. I don't seem to have anything from the teams. So, Brian, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Could I ask Malcolm to do the vote of thanks?
Yeah, with pleasure. I need to go back a little bit, back to probably about 1964 when you actually started, because we've followed each other about to some extent, not really working together, but we have followed each other about, because you started in 64, I started in 56. Wow. A long while ago now, isn't it? But all the things that you've been mentioning tonight, I recall, and many of us in here recall the way that it was, the way that we did things. It's not better or worse now or anything like that. It's just very different. That's what it is. And it's not harking back to golden days or anything like that. It's not like that at all. It's just the way that work was so much easier to do in those days. You could do almost anything you wanted, and there was always people about that you could go to, gather together. You talk to anybody in any other department. You didn't have to ask permission or anything like that. You just did it, and it worked. That's how it was. I just wish some of that sort of thing could be there now, because it would facilitate things considerably. It really would. And you'd still be able to work to all the legislation and so on if there was much more freedom to be able to just talk to each other, and contractors could talk to each other and so on. I hope the Great British Railways does actually do that in the end. Whether it will or not is another matter, isn't it? It's been a really pleasant evening, Brian. I was really looking forward to it, because I recognise a lot of the places that you're going to do there, because I was working there anyway. What what I would say is that it has been highly enjoyable tonight. It's not just anecdotes and looking back to the past. That's real stuff, real engineering and real day-to-day keeping railways running. It's been a real pleasure to have you. Please join with me.
You didn't mention how much the books were.
Oh, £15.
Okay, so if you've got £15 in your pocket, Brian, he's got some books in his bag, he's more than happy to part with them, but principally some of £15. Richard, next meeting, please.
Only, what else can we say about Colin Brading? Bringing along a Christmas box of delights, we hope. But we'll see. I'm speculating that one of the questions will be how many pigeons on the roof of Waterloo Station. But he says it might actually be what species of pigeon. Anyway, we'll see. Anyway, and as well, Tony well pointed out, meetings on Wednesday, not Tuesday for news lines, but we'll correct that for the next news lines. And it's round at the Staff Association. Because we have, lots of goodies on tap there, so to speak. Hope you'll come.
Or more commonly known as a Reading Railway Club nowadays, but
yes. Anyway, that's all I can say really.
okay, well, that just leaves me to say thank you once again to Brian. Thank you for turning up. It was a good turnout tonight. Thank you for
It's nice to see a lot of people there.
thank you for the people that are tuning in. I'll give you the usual reminder, please leave the Teams meeting so that the recording will stop. I see Isaiah's still there waiting for us to finish, so he'll probably stop the recording anyway, but it's still good practice to the meeting. And we look forward to seeing you at the Christmas quiz. Thank you very much.
Yes.